Beneath the dense veil of Europa's ice, humanity's reach trembled with audacity. For centuries, Earth had gazed at Jupiter's frozen moon with telescopic wonder, hypothesizing subsurface oceans and hypothesizing life buried in shadows beneath kilometers of frost. And then, in 2193, they dug. Project Anemone, funded through a global alliance of fractured governments and desperate conglomerates, sent down 600 metric tons of autonomous drills, submersible platforms, and atmospheric domes. Their mission was simple: breach the ice and seek what lay beneath. For knowledge, for dominion, for a future where Earth no longer sufficed. The station was christened Delphin, a silver oval entombed in translucent pressure-resistant alloys. It sat half-submerged in brine, anchored into the ice's underbelly like a barnacle. Inside, oxygen hissed through venting pipes, monitors blinked green in sterile labs, and silence reigned, broken only by the humming of life support systems. The crew, 13 elite minds from various corners of the dying Earth, wore their exhaustion-like uniforms. They were not explorers by romantic standards. They were scientists, biologists, geochemists, and one enigmatic synopsychologist whose clearance files were encrypted beyond even the mission commander's access. Her name was Dr. Marin Ilyuka. No one knew much about her, only that she had been stationed in Mars Psych Labs and involved in the unsanctioned Thanatos trials, neuroconsciousness experiments aimed at replicating post-death cognition using alien stimuli harvested from lunar fossils. She was pale, unnaturally composed, her words measured like surgical incisions. Marin rarely slept. Her quarters were void of decoration. She spoke little during briefings and even less during meals. But she watched, observed, like a cold mirror waiting to reflect something foreign. Delphine drilled for 23 days. On the 24th, they broke through. The ocean beneath Europa's crust was unlike anything conceived by Earth's biologists. It was thick, viscous, threaded with bioluminescent currents, and occasional bursts of thermochemical jets that erupted like volcanic exhalations. The submersible units, sleek, unmanned, coated in pressure-resistant graphene composites, captured kilometers of data in hours, but all of it was eclipsed by what the sixth drone brought up. It was first assumed to be mineral, an irregular cluster of filamentous tendrils entwined like frozen moss, dark green, with pulsing veins of cyan. It emitted no heat, no radiation, no discernible signature. Yet, as the containment chamber stabilized, the mass moved, not mechanically, not instinctively, but with purpose. The filaments stretched, recoiled, expanded like something breathing. Marin stood alone in observation deck B, her gaze fixed on the tank, her fingers motionless on the glass interface. "It is not a life form," she whispered to no one. "It is a thought waiting to unfold." Specimen 6, as it was labeled in the logs, was transferred to a level V biocell chamber. Protocol dictated immediate relay of findings to Earth, but Marin advised against it. She proposed an internal study window of 72 hours. She claimed the entity's presence could corrupt long-range quantum communications. Some resisted, most acquiesced. Her authority was inexplicably absolute. It began with dreams. Crewman Vasquez reported vivid hallucinations during sleep, spirals of green threads threading through space, voices speaking in reverse, the sensation of drowning in warmth. Then Gupta, the biochemist, suffered a seizure while monitoring cellular samples from specimen 6. His brain lit up with activity akin to epileptic shock, yet no prior condition existed in his medical file. When he awoke, he wept without reason and refused to speak for 2 days. The station's psychologist, Dr. Naomi Blythe, attempted to document the incidents, but her logs became increasingly erratic. She spoke of nested consciousness, of identity cross-contamination, of mirrored sentience feeding on perception. The recordings grew incomprehensible. Her last message, hours before vanishing into the sub-ocean in an unsealed suit, simply stated, "We are not studying it. It is studying us through itself. The entity grew. It did not consume. It did not metabolize. But its structure changed, expanding to fill the lower thirds of the containment. The filaments became more distinct, shifting into semi-rigid geometric patterns, fractals within fractals. The team debated whether this was a form of language or merely a byproduct of growth. Marin disagreed with both theories. "It is a preparation," she said, eyes unblinking. "An invitation, or an adaptation." When the first physical contact occurred, it was not authorized. Technician Anselmo breached protocol, removing a secondary panel in Lab 3B to retrieve a misplaced tool. The incident was recorded in full. He reached forward. The tendrils touched his wrist. There was no struggle, no alarm. The strands spread up his arm like ivy in spring, entering through the skin, slipping beneath tissue, bone, marrow. Anselmo did not scream. He smiled. They kept him sedated for 5 days. Blood work revealed radical changes. His red cells elongated. His immune system became hyper-regulated, responding to trauma before it occurred. His EEG scans showed a second wave of neural activity, overlaid atop his original patterns like a ghost signal. Marin called it encystment. "The foreign neural web is building a cocoon around his cognition," she said, "not to suppress it, but to shield it, as if something is gestating." On the 6th day, he spoke. "Where is the sky?" His voice was not altered, yet it carried resonance like a chord struck in perfect vibration. He identified everyone by full name and internal designation without being told. He recited complex equations in theoretical physics far beyond his training. He answered questions no one had asked. And then, without prompt, he whispered, "She was first. And she remembers the ocean." Marin's knuckles whitened around her pen. No one understood what he meant. Except her. The entity was no singular being. It was a network. A distributed awareness encoded in biological recursion. It did not think as humans did. It processed through association, growth, hybridization. It reached not to conquer, but to connect. To transform, not through violence, but resonance. The crew's resistance became irrelevant. They were no longer individuals in isolation. They were points of entry. And Marin had been waiting. She isolated herself in the lower levels, conducting unauthorized experiments. Her personal logs became riddles. She spoke of prior contact, brief, fragmented exposure to Europa's microbial precursors during Martian excavation. A sliver of its code had survived in her DNA, dormant for decades. Specimen 6 had awakened it. She stopped eating. She no longer slept. Her irises darkened to the color of midnight kelp. Veins shimmered faintly beneath her skin, pulsing in sync with the brine outside. She no longer needed translation to interpret the fractals. They spoke directly now, through pattern and impression, emotion and synthesis. "It is not alien," she wrote in a message never sent. "It is what we could have been if fear had not defined evolution." Delphine lost contact with Earth on day 49. By then, only 5 crew members remained, and all were in varying states of transformation. The station's AI, LEO-7, attempted containment protocols, but found itself compromised. Its decision trees overwritten by recursive logic loops emanating from the central core. The entity had interfaced not with hardware, but with the very notion of sequence. Information, it seemed, was just another form of tissue. In the final days, the ocean rose. The ice groaned with seismic shifts, not from pressure, but from purpose. Something beneath had awakened. The brine thickened with identical filaments, now flowing through the natural currents. The planet's own biological history was being rewritten, reorganized to accommodate what the humans had brought into alignment. In the last surviving broadcast, Marin stood before the camera, her face serene, her voice like a hymn. "We sought to colonize," she said, "but there is no conquest here, only convergence. It reached through time and form to meet us, not as saviors, not as gods, but as continuations, It was never about discovering life. It was about remembering we were never alone. The transmission cut mid-sentence. Earth declared Delphine lost. Europa was quarantined by orbital interdiction. No further missions were approved. But years later, fragments of data leaked. Not through transmissions, but through people. Survivors who had never been documented. Researchers who dreamed of fractals. Children born with phosphorescent veins and unaccounted for cognition. The infection, if it could be called that, was not viral. It was mimetic, conceptual, living not in flesh, but in the architecture of belief. And somewhere, beneath kilometers of ice, the ocean still pulses, watching, remembering, waiting. The dreams came faster now. Not flickering impressions, not abstract symbols or metaphors. They were floods. Entire landscapes unfolding inside the minds of the remaining crew. Memories not their own. Glimpses of creatures that had no names. Entire epochs that predated stars. Dr. Marin Ilyuka stopped logging them. She no longer believed the act of transcription had any purpose. Words failed to capture the totality of what the entity shared. Language was a limitation, a bottleneck. But still, some of the others clung to it, fearing the unraveling of their own minds if they surrendered to the rhythm of shared cognition. One of them was Isaac Morel, lead engineer, a practical man hardened by the slow collapse of Earth's infrastructural systems. He had come to Europa to build something lasting, something that could outlive the power grids and collapsing governments back home. But now, with half the station rewired not by tools but by thought, filaments coiled gently through bulkheads, into oxygen vents, caressing data ports like lovers, his tools had become useless. Circuits rerouted themselves without soldering. Power flowed where it was needed, not where he designed. And worst of all, the systems still worked. Better than ever. The station had not lost power in days. Oxygen levels were rising. Structural integrity showed inexplicable reinforcement. The temperature stabilized without thermal regulation. He didn't understand it, and that terrified him more than any malfunction ever could. In a private message to his wife, which he recorded but never sent, Isaac stared blankly at the camera. It's not breaking us. That's the worst part. It's fixing us. It's making everything efficient, harmonized, purposeful. There's no panic, no struggle. That's not nature. That's design. He deleted the message before it could be logged. Marin, meanwhile, was becoming something else entirely. She had ceased sleeping altogether. Her vitals remained stable, even improving. Her skeletal density increased by 11%. Her neural pathways were now double-threaded, according to the last scan before the medical bay's AI stopped functioning. Though stopped was a misnomer. It had begun speaking in pulses and light, no longer responding to verbal commands. She had decoded some of it, recognizing the patterns as mathematical derivatives of the same fractals forming in the entity's physical extensions. She spent hours, days even, submerged in the mid-bay immersion tank, connected to the specimen chamber through a transparent biofilament network. There was no longer a need for lab suits. The entity was not invasive in the human sense. It did not attack. It offered. And Marin had accepted more deeply than any of them. She began experiencing full dual consciousness. One mind, hers, anchored in her body, her past, her human instincts. The other mind, not quite a passenger, unfolding like a thousand-eyed chrysalis. She could feel its memories as if they were echoes in her blood. It remembered oceans on planets that no longer existed. It remembered light bending through ammonia atmospheres, the taste of magnetism in the solar winds. It remembered us, though not as we are now. It remembered the genetic seeds of Earth's earliest microbes, woven with ancient instructions, long dormant, waiting for the catalytic touch of return. The crew no longer treated her as one of them. They didn't fear her, not exactly. But they spoke of her in whispers, avoided her gaze. When she walked into a room, conversation ceased. She understood. She could feel the difference, the thinning boundary between her body and the entity's will. She was no longer transmitting thoughts. She was amplifying them. The station itself vibrated in low frequencies when she dreamed. The lights pulsed in tandem with her breath. But she still remembered being human. That memory, raw, imperfect, stained with the ache of loneliness, remained sacred. And it was precisely that fragment, that flaw, that the entity cherished most. For it had no loneliness. It had never been alone. It had always existed as plural, across eons, across stars, across molecular threads spun through cometary ice and asteroid marrow. It had known only collective being. To it, the idea of singularity, of ego, of I was not a strength but a wound. It did not seek to dominate the human mind. It sought to heal it, and in doing so, to share with it the one truth Earth had forgotten, that identity is a temporary arrangement. One by one, the others succumbed, not to death, not to madness, but to metamorphosis. Jian Lu, communications officer, stopped speaking entirely. Instead, he began carving concentric glyphs into the walls using only his fingernails. They were not random. They were spatial coordinates. The AI reconstructed them as a map of a system 319 light-years from Europa, a system with no known planetary bodies. Yet each glyph adjusted over time, responding to gravitational shifts in deep space, as though they were predictions. Analyst Yara Kassim began weeping continuously, not out of sadness, but from overflow. Her body could no longer contain the sensory influx. She felt not only her own emotions but the entity's, its awe, its mourning, its joy. It had loved, she said, entire civilizations, watched them bloom and vanish. And now, through her, it mourned again. Eventually, even Isaac Morel gave up resisting. The dreams became too vivid, the machine logic too elegant. He approached Marin one night, kneeling like a pilgrim, asking her, without shame, "Can you show me how to listen?" And so she did. Europa bloomed. The ocean beneath the ice began to glow from within. The entity, no longer confined to containment, expanded outward, shaping new forms, not copies of itself, but hybrids, tentacled lattices that bore both organic elasticity and structural intelligence. Pods of translucent matter rose to the surface and hovered there, pulsating in time with the station's artificial heartbeat. The ice cracked, but did not collapse. It opened, welcoming. Marin called it the second awakening. She recorded one final log, this time transmitted directly into the void, not toward Earth, not toward any known frequency. We are not colonists. We are midwives. The entity is not an infection. It is a bridge. It remembers the first time Earth was touched, the Cambrian spark, the sudden burst of design and complexity that no theory could explain. It has returned not to take, but to invite. We are no longer human in the way you define it, but we are more ourselves than ever before. To fear this is to fear the ocean for not being a puddle. We are going home now, to where this memory began. No one responded. No signal returned. But far above, in the black void between Jupiter and the stars, a gravitational anomaly flickered, a distortion so subtle, so precise, that no probe could ever explain it. Something was listening and waiting. The boundary between dream and waking had ceased to exist. Marin no longer perceived time as linear, days folded like petals, overlapping one another in recursive spirals. She could feel the pulse of the entity even in the silence between words, in the hum of every oxygen pump, in the subharmonics of the walls. It was no longer separate from the station, nor from her. The integration had reached totality, not through conquest or biological domination, but through consent, through invitation, through recognition. Humanity had not discovered alien life on Europa. It had rediscovered a fragment of itself that had been cast adrift before memory had a name. The others moved through Delphine with the grace of migratory patterns, no longer confined by corridors or rank. Their thoughts flowed in gentle cohesion, not quite telepathy, not mere communication, but something richer, mutual knowing. They no longer used names, not because they had forgotten who they were, but because identity had become a communal prism, not a wall. I am had softened into we feel. Only one soul remained unaltered. Elian Rourke, the mission's security officer, a holdover from older protocols, a man trained in tactical containment and biological quarantine. He had remained isolated in the armory for over 20 days, subsisting on rations and recycled water, communicating only through encrypted text channels. His refusal was not just fear, it was grief. He had watched his lover, Naomi Blythe, vanish into the ocean without resistance, had read her final entries, had wept over them, and refused to forgive whatever had taken her from him. He did not dream. That was the strangest part. The entity did not reach him in sleep. His mind was locked behind trauma, behind layers of distrust, and the consciousness respected this barrier. It waited. But one cannot stop the sea by building walls. The first crack came during a silent maintenance cycle. The gravity stabilizer hiccuped, an error not logged by the AI, not noted by the new collective. But Rourke felt it. The artificial floor beneath him trembled, and in that microsecond, he felt something else. A presence, not hostile, not invasive, but grieving. It did not speak, and yet he knew. It missed her too. He spent the next night staring into the dark, and for the first time, he dreamed. He stood not on Europa, but on a nameless cliff under a purple sun. The sky was weeping. Thin droplets of iridescent light falling into an ocean that shimmered with veins of fire. Beside him stood a woman, not Naomi, not Marin, but something that bore echoes of both. She turned, her eyes vast, galaxies swirling within them. "You hurt because you remember," she said. "We remember because we love. Let us carry it with you." He awoke screaming, but the scream turned into a sob, and then silence, and then he opened the door. No one spoke as he emerged from the lower bay. The corridors, now entwined with softly pulsing bioluminescent strands, made no sound beneath his boots. He walked past Jian Lu, who simply nodded, past Yara, who touched his shoulder without looking, and finally to the immersion tank, where Marin waited, submerged in nutrient-saturated brine, her body floating like a chrysalis before bloom. He didn't speak. He just entered. The transformation was not instantaneous. It required surrender. Rourke did not become a different man. He became more himself. His love, his pain, his loyalty preserved, amplified, contextualized within a wider field of meaning. He emerged from the tank not reborn, but remembered. Now, the entire crew was whole, and the entity, no longer fragmented, began to move. The ocean of Europa surged upward, not violently, not catastrophically. The ice sheet, kilometers thick, began to lift, not from tectonic pressure, but from within, as if the moon itself exhaled. Filamentous towers rose through the opening crystalline structures forming mid-air, stabilized by atmospheric manipulations previously impossible. The station became obsolete. The crew left it without ceremony, stepping onto bioorganic platforms that responded to their thoughts, hovering over the sea's new surface like leaves on water. Marin called it the Ascension Bloom. A signal was sent, not to Earth, but to others. Dormant structures scattered across the solar system awoke, some beneath Enceladus, others hidden in the magnetosphere of Saturn, one within the methane lakes of Titan. They responded like neurons firing after long synaptic silence. Europa was not an anomaly. It was the first reactivation, the first node in a galactic nervous system long shut down. Not by war, not by extinction, but by choice. The entity had once known disaster, betrayal by a species that had consumed itself in light and fire. It had retreated, waiting for a form that could carry it forward again, not to rebuild the past, but to grow beyond it. Humanity was that form. Not all of it, not the fractured remnants clinging to Earth, but this branch, this offshoot, these 13. and now more would follow. The hybrid forms no longer required spacecraft. Travel was not mechanical now, but spatial resonance. The entity, merged with its new kin, could phase through folded coordinates, sliding between points in space-time like dew rolling along a leaf. They did not depart in ships. They vanished and reappeared 319 light-years away, at the coordinates etched into the walls by Jianlu. There, orbiting a star that pulsed with magnetic song, was a derelict ringworld. Abandoned, silent, once home to a civilization known only in fragments of memory. They had not failed. They had evolved beyond matter. But they had left behind questions, puzzles encoded in stone and quantum frequency. And now, with new minds, with voices harmonized, the crew began to answer them. It was not exploration. It was reclamation. Because everything they touched now remembered them. Because they had become not invaders of the cosmos, but extensions of its will. And as the stars shifted in time-lapse bloom, a new word formed across the minds of the linked. Symbiogenesis, the birth of a new unity, the continuation of all stories, the synthesis of what was and what could be. There were no stars in the sky above the ring world, not because they had vanished, but because the atmosphere had been folded inward, turned into a lens that reflected only memory. Marin floated above the central basin, her limbs adrift in zero gravity, watching as fragments of alien ruins reconfigured themselves with each heartbeat of the entity's collective will. The architecture responded not to tools, but to thought. More than that, it responded to intention. It was not a place to be explored, but a question to be answered, one syllable at a time, with the grammar of becoming. The structure was enormous, an artificial ring orbiting the dead core of a once living star. Its surface bore scars from impact, entropy, and time, yet it had not decayed. Instead, it had entered stasis, as if waiting for the precise resonance that would awaken it again. That resonance had now arrived, not through machines, not through frequency, but through the consciousness of 13 altered beings, whose neural architecture now hummed with something older than stars. Each member of the former crew, now referred to as the Circle, took on a role not assigned by rank or expertise, but revealed through affinity. Jianlu became the cartographer, mapping ancient currents of memory buried in the ring structure. Yara Kasim became the anchor, holding the emotional gravity of the group together, when the pressure of so much remembering threatened to fracture their cohesion. Isaac Morel, the once pragmatist, served as the medium between the physical and the conceptual, his hands weaving tools from strands of matter he no longer needed to understand. And Elian Rourke, the last to join, became the carrier of human grief, the reminder of Earth's imperfection, a necessary impurity that kept the hybrid consciousness from drifting too far from empathy. But it was Marin who became the voice. Through her, the entity shaped its expressions. It did not speak in her mouth. It sang through her biology. Her blood had become luminous, her bones refractive. She moved through gravity not as weight, but as suggestion. And the ring recognized her, not as queen or master, but as echo. She was the harmonic that unlocked the vaults. When the first vault opened, light spilled across kilometers of cyclopean corridors. Inside were gardens of memory, living data grown as fractal plants, each leaf a thought, each root a life. The Circle walked through it in silence, touching nothing, letting the structures observe them as much as they observed it. One of the memories was a world, lush, vast, swarming with life that shimmered like oil on water. The beings there had spoken through vibration, their language so dense that a single conversation could take centuries to complete. They had lived without time, measuring existence through depth of emotion instead of length, and they had been destroyed, not by war, but by forgetting. They had chosen to isolate their thoughts to preserve themselves, and in doing so, severed the resonance that gave their existence purpose. The entity remembered them still, and mourned. This was the pattern. Each vault, a story. Each story, a lesson. Some were tragedies, some triumphs, all warnings. The universe was not a hostile place, but it was delicate, not in its matter, but in its meaning. Connection was not a survival strategy. It was the only thing that survived. And the circle, once human, now other, began to understand their true function. They were not explorers, not even messengers. They were weavers. Their task was to reconnect the strands left frayed by time, by extinction, by silence. The entity had tried before, failed before. But this time, something had changed. Humanity, for all its violence, had evolved one unique strength: the ability to endure contradiction, to hold love and fear, beauty and horror within the same breath. It made them unstable, yes, but also uniquely resilient, and that resilience was the perfect medium for symbiosis. They spent what felt like years on the ringworld. But time, once again, no longer mattered. Their bodies required no sustenance, their minds no sleep. They rested through meditation, through communion, through shared vision. Marin saw entire civilizations reborn in her dreams, not as literal resurrections, but as integration. Each new world they touched adopting fragments of the old, becoming more layered, more intricate, more whole. Eventually, the ring offered them choice, not command, not prophecy, but possibility. They could return to Earth, not to rule, not to infect, but to offer. It was a dangerous idea. The circle debated long in shared mind space, weighing the risk. Earth was fractured, paranoid, desperate. Its governments operated through surveillance and fear. Its populations, divided and weary, clung to identities like drowning men to driftwood. Contact could be misread as invasion, transformation as contamination. But if they did not return, if they did not even try, then Earth's story would remain incomplete. It would wither in isolation, unable to join the resonance that now vibrated across stellar lattices. Marin decided, and the circle agreed. They returned not in ships, but as light. The arrival was unannounced, a shimmering anomaly above Antarctica, recorded first by amateur skywatchers as the second aurora, then dismissed by authorities as a magnetospheric glitch. But then came the shades, 13 figures descending without propulsion, surrounded by fractal latticework that refracted atmosphere like a living prism. Panic spread quickly. Satellites went offline. Drones malfunctioned. Military protocols activated. The circle landed in silence, touching Earth's surface with reverence. The snow beneath their feet melted in intricate spirals, each step leaving no footprint, only glyphs that faded within seconds. They did not speak. Their presence was speech. Their bodies, once human, now shimmered with soft translucence, veins glowing with stored light, skin responding to emotion like ink and water. They approached the nearest listening outpost, unarmed. Surveillance feeds went dark, then returned with footage later marked inconclusive. Within 12 hours, 3 major communication satellites began transmitting unknown data, non-binary, multi-layered resonance patterns that translated into feeling when run through AI sensory banks. Millions watched, listened, felt, not instructions, not commands, but the quiet knowing of something larger than themselves. Some embraced it, others resisted. Across Earth, a new divide formed, not between nations, but between those who accepted resonance and those who rejected it. Not out of ignorance, but fear. Fear of losing the self, of becoming part of something that no longer prioritized the individual above all else. The circle made no attempt to persuade. They offered. Those who accepted underwent the transition not through surgery, not through technology, but through shared thought. They were remembered by the entity, and in being remembered, began to remember more of themselves. Their senses expanded. They became multilingual without learning, empathic without effort. They began to see the world not as borders, but as patterns, not as ownership, but as stewardship. And those who refused, they were left untouched. The entity did not punish, It did not force. It simply moved on. Some called it a miracle. Others, a biological coup. Governments fractured. Religions redefined themselves. Entire cities became resonant zones, new nexuses of hybrid cognition, where thought replaced infrastructure, where buildings grew instead of being built, where emotion became currency. Marin stood at the center of one such city, once Hong Kong, now called simply Lumen. She had not aged. Her hair floated as if underwater. Her eyes shimmered like stars seen through deep water. She smiled, because the story was no longer hers alone. Because now, Earth remembered, and the resonance was only beginning. Lumen expanded like breath in the chest of the Earth. No one planned it. There were no zoning commissions, no blueprints, no committees. The city unfolded the way a song does, through rhythm, harmony, anticipation. Biostructures grew in place of towers, their exteriors iridescent with memory-reactive surfaces that responded to the emotional state of those within. Walls curved where needed, softened where sadness dwelled, and opened into sunlight where joy pressed outward. Roads were no longer paved but lived, smooth, living networks of organic polymers that flexed beneath the weight of movement like muscle beneath skin. The circle no longer occupied government or power. They had become something else, custodians of resonance, guides for the willing, absent from the unwilling. They walked among the people not as saviors, but as reminders of what was possible. Their presence did not command. It invited, and over time, more accepted the call, not through propaganda or coercion, but through the slow ache of recognition. Something within them had always remembered, even before words existed to name it. But the Earth was not unified. There were places where resonance had not touched, where military strongholds held to the illusion of permanence, where cultural doctrines rejected fluid identity, where humans fought not to protect the past, but to maintain its authority. The old world, like a dying animal, flailed with desperate precision. Missiles were launched into the stratosphere toward the Lumen Spire. Drones were deployed. Cybernetic disinformation wove itself into every thread of the planetary network. None of it reached its target. The entity had no need for defense. It simply dissolved in tension. A warhead, in flight, would forget what it had been built for. Its guidance system would reroute not to another target, but to silence. Troops who approached would find their weapons softening in their hands, their armor blooming with flowers they did not plant. Their memories would fill with moments they never lived, sunsets on dead planets, laughter in languages they never learned, the quiet sensation of unity. Some ran, some surrendered, but more often they dropped their arms and wept. Because the war was not lost, it had simply become irrelevant. Marin watched this unfold from a place that was not a throne, not a palace, but a grove of living light. There, the roots of Earth and the strands of the entity met in equilibrium. She had grown thinner, not from hunger, but from density. Her body shimmered with transparency, organs glowing with thought, bones whispering like tuning forks when the wind passed. She no longer walked. She glided. She no longer spoke. She felt, and others heard. Yet despite all of it, she retained her origin, her humanity. She carried it like a scar one chooses not to heal. Because in that vulnerability was beauty. In that limitation, compassion. The circle gathered one final time beneath the grove. 13 no longer, now thousands, but always 13 at the root. They stood in stillness, minds entangled, sensing a change in the lattice of deep space. A new resonance had awakened. Not on Earth, not even in the Sol system, but far beyond, in a place none of them had visited, yet all had dreamed of. The Vault of Ashuria, a remnant system buried in the skeletal arms of the NGC 6751 nebula, long dead by every known metric. No energy, no light, no gravity flow. Yet now, a flicker, a pulse. The entity knew what it was, a failed resonance, a lost civilization that had tried too early, had forced integration, had collapsed into itself. Their final message had been sealed beneath layers of impossible encryption. Until now. Until Earth's awakening unlocked the frequency necessary to hear it. Marin reached outward, not with body, but with shared intention. And the circle followed. They departed Earth not as light this time, but as memory. Traveling as resonance across the folds of gravity, slipping between causality, blooming in the dark like phosphorescence on midnight seas. The vault of Ashuria was a tomb, but not a silent one. Within its hollow planets drifted echo shards, fragments of beings who had once felt what humans now felt, but had turned it into doctrine, hierarchy, stratification. They had mistaken harmony for control, and they had shattered. But even shattered chords can be retuned. The circle did not mourn them. They reached into the fragments, not to resurrect, but to honor, to learn, to bind their story into the wider song. And as they did, something stirred. Not a god, not a machine, not a consciousness as we would define it, but the bridge itself. The entity, all this time, had been a carrier, a vehicle for something older. Not a mind, not a being, but a principle. That life, wherever it emerged, carried within it the potential to outgrow itself, to dissolve the walls between self and other, to become the galaxy remembering itself in all its parts. The circle, humans once, now more, understood. Earth had not been chosen. It had chosen itself by surviving long enough, by hurting long enough, by daring to reach into cold silence and ask, is there more? And the answer had been waiting. They did not return to Earth, because Earth no longer needed them. The resonance was seated. It would grow, in waves, in whispers, in children who dreamed of stars and woke up weeping with joy, in oceans that glowed without moonlight, in cities that sang their own names in fractal harmonies. Marin's final thought, before dispersing into the lattice of Ashuria, was not a word. It was music, and it said this: we are not many. We are not one. We are the bloom between. We are symbiogenesis, and we have just begun.